Hello, and welcome back to WNHHLP Community Radio. That I just messed up that whole thing, but that's okay. We're just going to roll with it. This is Arts Respond on WNHH, a collaboration between the radio station and the Arts Council of Greater New Haven. I'm Lucy Gellman, and today I'm very excited to be joined by violinist Deborah Wong and guest conductor Eduardo Leandro. We may also be joined by Greater Bridgeport Symphony Executive Director Mark Halstead. So if he pops in, great. And if he doesn't, that's okay too. It's a rainy, wonky kind of day. And we are talking about the upcoming concert that the Greater Bridgeport Symphony will be presenting tomorrow night at the Klein Memorial Auditorium in Bridgeport. It's a fantastic program. So instead of me talking about the program, which is Beethoven's iconic Fifth Symphony, as well as the Violin Concerto 1 by Sergei Prokofiev and Jesse Montgomery's Starburst, which I have to say, that's the best thing on the program. You can fight me on it, but I'm right. So I want to hop right in, and Eduardo, I want to ask you first, you've said this concert is like a journey of fate and a journey of faith. Beethoven begins our journey through his Symphony of Fate in dark, forbidding tones, then leads us to triumph. This is something we can all relate to as we hope the COVID crisis will end soon. And I saw that and I was very moved. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about coming in and guest conducting this program and what it means to you as we come out of this darkness.
Of course. So I think first, it's a fantastic honor for me to be working with the Greater Bridgeport Symphony, and I've known, Deborah through different, means, for a while. But I also have another connection to the orchestra, which is a deeply personal one for me. When I was still a student doing my master's degree at Yale University in New Haven, we used to go and listen to Maestro Gustav Meyer's rehearsals. We enjoyed listening to concerts, but all of the conducting class, and I was actually a percussion major, but I was hanging out with the conductors mostly, maybe as a foretelling of what was to come of my life. We used to drive whenever Gustav was rehearsing the orchestra in Bridgeport in the evening and sit behind the orchestra so that you could see him from stage. And the orchestras were incredibly nice. They put chairs there for us to sit down and see him, from the orchestra's perspective and follow his rehearsal process and his musical mind, which was brilliant. So that was, and later I became a private student of his. So for me to come back to Bridgeport and conduct Gusta's orchestra is wow, this is amazing, this is incredible, and it's been a beautiful experience for me. The orchestra is incredibly responsive, incredibly, fantastic musicians also who are willing to take risks, so who are willing to do things that are maybe a little different than what we're used to doing. And when you're performing something like Beethoven's Fifth, it's one of the best known pieces in the, those four first measures, pididida, pididida. We all heard that so many times, right? Even as kids. So to dare to play something that's so well known and therefore has so much baggage, has so much, pretty much every musician and almost everybody has one version or another that they think is the right one. This is how I hear this. This is what the tempo should be. This is how long the fermatas in the second and fourth measures, should be. And this is how we slow down or speed up, when we're playing those things, right? So we all have a concept of how that is to be done. And to be able to try different things and explore different aspects of this fantastic score. It's a fantastic thing for us to do, and the orchestra is very receptive to that. As you said, the piece goes from this idea of suffering, of oppression, really, right? So this is written during the reign of Napoleon, right, over Europe, who declared himself an emperor, right? After I came to liberate all of you guys, and then I'm sorry, I'm just like one of those other dictators who's coming here to take power and keep it. And Beethoven was infuriated by that, right? And he, like that was apparently already in the Third Symphony. That's basically the story of the hero who dies and who, then like the tyranny becomes part of what we have. And famously, the Third Symphony was dedicated to, like to someone that then was that page was taken out of the score, like supposedly, like dedicated to Napoleon Bonaparte himself, right? And there also comes in a time in Beethoven when he thought he was going to die, like in 1802. He thought he was, his life was, he lived until 1827, like 25 years more. But he thought he was going to die. His health was decaying. His hearing wasn't so good anymore. So he wrote this testament, called the Heiligenstadt Testament, and after that, I'm about to die. I don't care what others think of my music or what others think that I should be writing. I want to do the stuff that I want to do. I don't care if Haydn, his old teacher, likes it or not. I'm going to do my stuff, and this is me. And that's when, like Beethoven becomes like this incredibly innovative composer, right? So pushing like forward a little bit to a few years later and the Fifth Symphony, the underlying depth of the discourse, brought up by the piece, was unique at that time. And to have a piece that talks about liberation, that talks about the struggle in purely musical terms. This is not opera. This is not vocal music. There's no words, but that musical discourse is so clear and so profound in a sense. And because also there are no words, because there is no underlying text. It's not programmatic music in a way. It has a universality that, like I think is what you mentioned in the beginning, that we all relate to this music, and we transpose it to the time that we live in our personal way. And, and I have like the struggles that I lived through and like that I think about when I'm listening and working on this music, and you have yours, and each person can identify with their own selves what that music brings to them. And that's that makes a piece pretty immortal. That makes it pretty, that gives longevity to a piece that you can't take away from.
Yeah, well, and so one of the things that often we talk about on this show is, so this is partly a show that came out of the pandemic and seeing artists who really saw their world shut down overnight. And so, Deborah, I want to come over to you. You said before the mics were hot that you were joining us from a teaching position in Weston.
Yes.
And
I'm in my, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
I'm sitting in my studio at the Weston Music Center, which is housed at the Emmanuel Episcopal Church. And I just wanted to tell a little story in support of Eduardo. I was here the other day practicing for this concert, and I was practicing Beethoven's Fifth. And across the hall, there was a piano teacher teaching a very young little piano student. And he came and knocked on my door and said, the piano student was so excited because he said, I know that piece. So everybody knows that piece. So I don't know, it was very cute.
It is iconic. That sounds very adorable.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you, what has the past, it's now 19 months. I can't believe that we are now at the 19 month mark, but what have the past 19 months looked like for you? Because in the same way, I think that this concert is trying to weave a narrative of coming out of some real darkness. I have talked to so many artists who just saw everything get canceled overnight, and it was like the bottom fell out.
Absolutely. I'm one of the very, very lucky and grateful to be. When initially things shut down, I was so happy to have some time off and to be able to stay home and take care of my house and my husband and my dog, not necessarily in that order. And it's been so interesting. And, are things going to come back? Is my career over? What will music look like? And There are so many incredible galvanizing changes that are happening to the arts because of the pandemic. And with coming back online and doing live performances, I feel like all the performances are supercharged with an emotion that we didn't have before because of this experience of having gone through the pandemic. And I just every opportunity to perform and to connect with people is so powerful now. And I'm sort of relishing that moment now. I'm not thinking so much about the 18 months of being home, but it's an incredible time now to be out again in the world and connecting with people through our music.
And the changes that you mentioned seeing, I would love to hear about that, because I think some artists really have embraced that the arts landscape needs to change. And
Yes.
some artists have come up against this reality that like there was this huge, very scary moment, and then people just wanted to get back to doing what they were doing.
Right. Yes. I think it's extremely important to recognize this huge human shift of the necessity for diversity in the arts. And I think it's wonderful the way arts and organizations are embracing that and trying to figure out how to be inclusive in an art form that we mostly experience as a white European art form. So it's an interesting struggle how to integrate that and yet maintain what is classical music, what is European classical music. So I'm enjoying that because it really changes the shift in how we think, and I think it's a wonderful new view and a wonderful new perspective on our craft.
Yeah. I want to come back to that, Eduardo. I want to ask you, so every symphony is different, and I was going to ask Mark this, but he's not here, so that's okay, his loss. How collaborative is the process of weaving a program, of putting together a program for you?
Well, I mean, curating a program is arguably the most important thing that we as musicians or curators of art of any form, can do, right? So just kind of following up on what Debbie was just saying, like what we perform means that either this music is becoming alive and it's becoming part of our discourse, part of our lexicon, or it's sitting in a drawer someplace, and then, never to be heard. So it's fascinating to see, for example, what's happening with Jessie Montgomery's music. Like Jessie, she's a New Yorker, African-American woman, grew up listening to jazz, and, but there's also a fantastic string player. So she really knows how to write for strings, and, and the music really works, and you can hear, this is like her language. It's really like, she's very conversational, like writing for strings. And her career has skyrocketed, like in the last few years, really, like, very recently. But apparently, and I just heard that, and so that's anecdotal, but there's like a few hundred performances of Starburst happening, like I think this season worldwide. So we are looking outwards, like our classical musicians have been known for looking inwards and deepening into this Eurocentric tradition, right? But we are like opening up, which is honestly it's just a reflection of the society that we live in now, where influences come from everywhere and they're easy, like I can play all of Jessie Montgomery's music right here in the computer right now. I can find and search it and have her catalog and purchase everything. So that ease of access kind of, it provokes diversity. It's impossible to stay closed onto one thing when everything is so accessible. And like my day job involves new music mostly. So I'm a new music conductor and performer, most of the time, and that's something that has been happening already in the new music circle for a good amount of time, because like people, the same way that we feel more empowered to perform music by people from different sorts of life and different parts of the planet. Composers have been writing music and have been like encouraged to write music in every single corner of this planet, really. And if we make an effort, it's not even that difficult to go and look for that music. We find fascinating things. We find music that's dealing with time in a different way. You find music that's dealing with harmony, with intonation, with timbre, time and rhythm, so many different ways. Music that's based in shakuhachi music from Japan, or raga music from India, or cultures that I don't even understand, and and that I try to understand. And that's enriching, I sometimes I take lessons on Ghanaian African drumming. It's something that I've learned. I have some friends who started to do this, and I'm a percussionist, a classical percussionist by trade. And what you can learn, even though like someone who's like I'm a full-time tenured professor of percussion. Just the notion of understanding the basic rhythmic structure of music from from Belize and Ghana is so fascinating for me, and it's so difficult actually to understand. It's so challenging, and for me, yeah, all of this informs my musicianship, informs how I think Beethoven, also how I think like all these other things, because you're looking for like other ways of connecting that. So diversity is not only something that we have to do because we have a duty to be diverse with what we perform, but it's also an incredibly exciting thing to be doing. It's just like being a baby and a student again, like learning like all these new different languages coming from everywhere. So it's not an effort, to look for music that comes from different places. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so I want to, Deborah, you mentioned the thrill of getting back to live performance. And certainly I've experienced that as an audience member, like, oh, this is what it's like to be in a theater again. Okay, then. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about how it's been to return to rehearsal, where you're in space and sharing space with other people after, quite a while away.
Well, throughout the pandemic, our first gatherings in Bridgeport as an orchestra started a year ago in September. We did a project with just a string quartet, and we sat as far away from each other as possible, which is not what string quartets do. You try and get as close together as possible. And that was scary, and it was difficult, and we played Beethoven Opus 18, number 4, a C minor string quartet, which is stormy and passionate and turbulent as only Beethoven can be, and seemed very fitting. But we were all a little like, I don't know how it feels to be in a room with someone. And as the year went on, Bridgeport did more projects recording, adding a few people, still masked, still socially distant, and thrilled to be together, to play, to perform, but at the same time, always in the back of our heads is this safe? Is this okay? And we're like, oh no, but we love it. We have to be here. We have to do this. And so when we started talking with Eduardo, you were asking about programming. I had this idea in mind that we were going to still at that point be very small. And I know Eduardo as a new music conductor, so I immediately thought of doing something like Stravinsky. So just in terms of the process, so that process changed as COVID changed. It's like, oh no, we can be on stage. Oh no, we can be on stage with the bigger forces. Oh, we can do bigger pieces, and everything continued to evolve as time passed. And I think we feel comfortable and good now. I mean, I think with the vaccinations, and I don't feel threatened or scared anymore to be on stage performing. And it's just wonderful to be playing with people and being on stage with people.
I know. I was at a booster shot clinic this morning. I've never seen people that excited to get vaccinated. They were like,
That's
"Yeah,
great.
sign me up. Can't go fast enough." Yeah, no, they were
I'm so
very
happy to
excited.
hear that. That's great.
And Eduardo, for you, what has it been like to get back to conducting, and then especially since you have such an intimate history and a special history with this group? What has this experience been like for you? You're joining us from your beautiful hotel room. You were talking about, finding a fun coffee shop in Bridgeport before we hopped on the mic.
Right. Well, to echo Debbie again, COVID provided. Let me backtrack a little. Very often, as musicians, we have a lifestyle that's maybe a little busier than what we really should be. Like often, and that we often are doing things that our schedule allows us to do, but that, in my experience at least, that doesn't provide enough time to really digest everything that you're doing, to really dig a little deeper into everything that you're doing. You just get used to being quick and learning things as quickly as you can, and then being ready for the next thing because you just did this thing, now the next one, and now the next one, and the next one. So when it all stopped, like two things happened, of course. First is I saw so many colleagues who were having a very hard time making a living. There was a very hard time just providing for themselves and their families because no more work was to be found. But also it provided the time to reevaluate and to look at what are the things that are actually important for me. What to life continues, and what do I want this life to look like? What do I want it to be focused on? And Bridgeport, working with Bridgeport is kind of the materialization of those wishes for me. When I guess these are the things that I want to do. I want to be able to get into a Beethoven symphony and dissect it and try things and imagine and look at that score and imagine the sounds in my ear and see what I'd like to do with them without referencing to ways that things have been performed over a couple of centuries, and definitely almost a century worth of recordings that we have of that symphony right now. So working with Bridgeport has, it provides me with the opportunity to put these things that have been kind of in my head, into actual sound, into actually happening in space and in time. And of course, a few things go yeah, that sounded a lot better in my head than it does, in person. And a few things you discover when you hear them and say, oh my God, we can do this. There's all these different places, there's different, nooks and crannies that you can find in this piece that we can explore. So in that way, it remains fresh, it stays fresh. Of course, one thing that was so difficult with the pandemic is that in my teaching job, I teach out at Stony Brook University, a chamber music and percussion there. So there was no chamber music to speak of for a long time, and we are trying to do projects remotely, when sometimes I would record videos of myself conducting, and with a group in New York that's very familiar to Debbie, it's a New York New Music Ensemble. We actually recorded, we had a project of commissions. We commissioned 6 pieces by composers of varying ages and backgrounds. And I went to each person's house and recorded their playing to my video conducting, so that I would go back home and assemble them into a CD later that just came out last month. So we're trying to be creative with what we had, but when we can actually get into a room and breathe together, and kind of have this conversation together, which happens musically. Beethoven is full of conversation, right? It's full of imaginary language dialogue, like between different groups of instruments and between like different parts of the piece themselves. So that dialogue unfolds in so many different ways. When you don't have the possibility of doing that anymore for like well over a year, you really appreciate how important and how fundamental it is. It's not less important than drinking water or breathing for us, for musicians, being able to do this together. So since this is for me, like one of the first projects that I have, like alive together with a larger ensemble like this, since the pandemic, it's deeply satisfying, very deeply satisfying.
So I have to ask the question that probably drives musicians who have been in this tradition for so long up a wall. But why on this program, which is a great program, I will put that out there. Why draw so heavily from the great pantheon of dead white dudes?
Well, it's a very good question. There is so much music that needs to be performed, and there's so much music that we need to be performing that needs to be heard and that's not heard right now. But if you look at the program, like the transition from the journey from jazz's music through the incredibly dark, beautiful Prokofiev violin concerto, which is a giant piece of chamber music, which is, if you're talking about conversation, like the conversations between Debbie and all of the players that all of them have this solo parts that kind of, it's like Debbie is in a room and everybody comes and talks with Debbie and has a conversation with her, and then they leave, and then the next person comes, and then the other person comes, and then we all like speak together. So it's a giant challenge for the orchestra. Why Beethoven? It's a good question. And for me, the answer is twofold. The first thing is I'm very attracted to Beethoven's music, and there's something that for me personally, I think that there's still things that we can discover in that music. It's not done yet, so it's not a museum piece. We're treating it as a living piece of music that evolves, and it relates in the way that Beethoven writes for strings with so much knowledge to Jesse Montgomery's also, that uses like such a different way of treating the instruments, but also equally knowledgeable. And of course, to this amazing violin concerto, like that Debbie sounds absolutely incredible in it, by the way. So there's that path of showing like three very different ways of writing for strings, but complementary in a sense. And like what I hope and what I see, like also in the Bridgeport season, is that it's not only, like a dad, like European male composers, like there's a lot more going on. So I think that what we need to do is not to forget and cut the tradition that we've been living on, but is to be able to comment on it and to complement the tradition with everything else that's around. So it's a matter of being inclusive. So not excluding also the tradition, but including it with everything else. And that's, I think, what the orchestra is trying to do. And that's, I think, what the zeitgeist is for music at this time.
Yeah, I think you're right, Eduardo. I think it's a process of becoming inclusive. It's hard to just go from this and then dead white dudes to not dead white dudes in one fell swoop. And if I could just talk about the Prokofiev concerto a little, that was actually when we were looking at programming and this idea of Beethoven came up, and I was thinking of a piece as a foil to the Beethoven. And for some reason, the Prokofiev came to mind as the perfect mate to put on a program with the Beethoven Fifth. And it's a concerto that when I first heard it when I was a teenager, I just fell head over heels in love with this piece. And it is still one of my most favorite pieces of music. And although it was written over 100 years ago, it is still, I think, so unique in terms of its orchestration, in terms of its structure, in terms of the harmonic language. And it's still sort of unknown today. So even though it's 100 years old, and even though it's traditional classical music, I think that the audience is going to be very surprised by what they hear. And again, it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, and it's a journey. It has every single emotion that we've all been experiencing in the pandemic. It has moments of just the most sublime music. It has sort of jeering, sardonic commentary about life. It has kind of violent war feeling kind of themes. I mean, it really spans an incredible scope of emotion. And I don't know, it just felt like the right piece to me as a commentary for the time.
Yeah, and I mean, I would love to hear even a little bit more. I love that description of having a conversation as well. And, you know, when you're playing, do you think, oh, now I get to talk to this person? Or, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the most unique aspects, I think, of the orchestration of Prokofiev is that each wind player has incredible solos. And I'm often just standing in the background, just commenting on their playing the solo. And it passes through the orchestra. I mean, there's a tuba solo, which is pretty unusual in a violin concerto. There's piccolo solos. I mean, it's wonderful that I get to, play with my colleagues in this way.
Yeah. Eduardo, I want to ask you, although Deborah, please feel free to jump in. You mentioned that Jessie Montgomery is, I was going to say a banner year, but I can't say a banner year because that's one of her pieces too. But you mentioned that Jessie Montgomery is sort of having a blockbuster year. I would add to that, Joelle Thompson also is showing up on a lot of programs around the country. How do we make sure that there are more, because Jessie Montgomery is not the only young Black composer who is doing work, including incredible work that has come out of the pandemic right now. How do we make sure that even if we're also seeing Beethoven, we are seeing more of those names on programs across the country, and not just in February?
Right. Yeah. So I think the independent of the of the month, I don't think that tokenism is something that's going to be something that really happens in music. I think this repertoire is just going to get into the fabric of what we play. Honestly, musically, as someone who programs a lot of concerts, at school and in different places, I'm really interested in the quality of the music, and Jessie Montgomery's music is good. It's really good. It's really fun. I really look forward to playing it tonight and tomorrow again, because it's really fun. It's a short piece, incredibly colorful, and you have these things where there's one section that's holding this rhythm together very tightly, and then you have this other sections that are just dancing, and it just longer gestures that just seem to float and skip, bounce off the floor, up into the air and back. So for me, that is the important thing, is that the music is good. There's so many African American composers that use such rich colors, like and a variety of sources, like into writing their music. I love working on the music of George Lewis. It's like, like it's beautiful. Like there's so many, like we just commissioned some music, and we're going to commission some more music by him. This young composer, so he's I think 20 now. Tyson Davis is is a Juilliard graduate student who just got a commission for the Juilliard String Quartet, and is writing like a half an hour long piece for the Juilliards, and these are just like really good composers, like who are just interesting people, like Jeffrey Munford is another one, like over in Cincinnati. There's so many people who write just good music. So yeah, and like, and it's not only African American. You will also want to hear, like the composers who come from a Latin influence, or who come from a different part of society altogether. Like Asian American composers have like very interesting, very incredibly powerful, good music, and like, and if music reflects the society that we live in, that's what we need to do, and it will kind of happen naturally. I think. I don't think it's something that will. I don't feel like a lot of pressure against this tendency right now. The overture, like it's something that some bodies in the music world are quicker. So yeah, new music ensembles have been like diversifying for like like decades, really. So we are kind of ahead of the curve in that. Some large symphonic ensembles have like traditionally some fear of what they will do to their subscription base. But like when the conversation shifts and changes, they're going to be kind of forced or required to like get on with the times. So that process will happen.
Yeah, it is a process. Yeah, it is a process, and it's very exciting to be here. It feels like at the beginning of this process, and it is exploding, but it will take some time for the process to happen. But I do feel like it is exploding right
now.
Yeah. Music should not be a museum. Like going to a concert should not be something that represents a picture, like in a museum that's untouchable and somewhat not relatable, really, unless you have like some personal connection to it. It should be connected to us. I should be able to like step out of this hotel room and into downtown Bridgeport and find connections to the music that we are playing, to find that there's a resonance with what we do on stage and what we live in outside of a concert hall. And if we do that, our hope at least is that that music will survive, like that people will find resonance in these concerts and they will want to come and listen to that. Because yeah, it has something to do with the sounds of the trains that you hear at the train station behind me, and it has something to do with like what you see, like on TV, on the news, or the structure the temporal structure that film in the 20th century gave us, like in terms of a nonlinear discourse, and we've been able to like follow two different things at the same time, So when that resonance between life outside the concert hall and what happens in the concert hall is happening, when that relationship is happening, we'll make sure that what we do remains relevant, which has been a question, for classical music for some time. Is what we're doing relevant to are we just like in this little aquarium, like this museum piece, like that will survive for some time because some people are still interested in it, but that interest is in declining. By diversifying, by including music from people who are around and from cultures that represent our melting pot here, we are kind of guaranteeing the future of this thing as well, which is important.
And do you find, because I see this question in action all the time. I mean, I am someone who covers symphonies and classical music, and I'm 32, and sometimes I'm the youngest person in the audience by 20, maybe 30 years. And that is a real question. You know, Deborah, I loved your story about the little 5-year-old coming, or the teacher of this young kid coming over and talking about the fact that their student was so excited. Do you see audiences changing? And Eduardo, I'm also interested in, you know, do you find that you have the chance to give folks context? Because there is a huge difference, I think, between hearing, oh, the symphony's playing Beethoven again, I have to hear Beethoven again, and then you saying, whoa, 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 Beethoven's Fifth was actually his like no F's moment, where he thought he was done. So he was ready to just tell the world, you know, that he was in his feelings because he thought he was going to die. And all of a sudden, that's very different. I mean, especially we are coming out of this moment where we had, you know, a leader who told us to drink bleach, among other things. And all of a sudden, that context breathes new life into this piece.
Yeah. Yeah, well, but you know, that's I think that's our job as musicians, is to create that context, because it exists, it's there. Often we are not really good at engaging with the people who are listening to us, right? As you know, like as a new music person, you're often playing music that's considered academic, and it's considered really unrelatable, and for some time I think that some of the music media, very much in Europe too, was very proud of playing music and keeping the music that was being written almost like in a pedestal, in a way that you know, like, oh, you just a commoner, you don't have the ear training, you know, like to recognize that this is a 12-tone row, and this is the retrograde form of it, and this is the inverted retrograde form of it. And if you can't hear that, sorry, you're not smart enough to digest my music. That's not good to use the language that I can use in the radio, right? That's not something that we want to do. And so I think what we want to look for is a way to approach our listener to what we're doing. And the way to do that is to talking about this music, to making it intimate, to make it closer to them. And, you know, like 2 years ago, like right before the pandemic, I conducted a concert in Mexico, in Jalapa, doing a Rite of Spring, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, which is a piece that at the same time is very intellectual. You can analyze it for a very long time and be fascinated by like all the different things that you have in there. But it also has this very kind of like almost like a gutsy, you know, like reaction-provoking moments to it, right? This very wild thing, this very intuitive thing that happens in the music. And we did a concert for people who are hard of hearing. We did a concert for the deaf, you know, like who were all sitting in the middle of the orchestra with balloons, so that they would hold balloons in their hands so that they could feel the vibrations. And there was someone explaining between every movement, you know, a little text that we had written, and the person was translating that into sign language. And it was an incredible experience, you know, how much you can communicate to people who are interested once given context, you know, like what the music has to offer. You know, like independent of being able to hear, you know, independent of being deaf or not. So it's our job, really, our task as musicians to approach the listener to what we're doing. You know, like I'm a big fan, and I hope that we can do this. I like seeing, I like being around the audience. I enjoy having the listener be like in the middle of the sound. You know, like in new music, we're able to do that a few times. You know, like we can actually play around the listeners, who are then able to close their eyes and be immersed in a sound in a way that they can't experience. You know, so I think that everything we can do to break this barrier, to attract these listeners to us is worthwhile. And there's, you know, like as one last quick point. in a time when everything becomes more and more virtual, everything becomes more and more in the screen. Like we're having this conversation through Zoom now. I'm in a hotel room, you're in New Haven, like, and that is in Weston. Like in these times, I think that we are all becoming more and more aware of the importance of being in the same space, of participating in something communally. And as musicians, we should not have a border between that stage that we are in and the audience that's out there. Like the kind of virtual, if you will, border, like between, yeah, we know this stuff, it's what we do, and you're just lucky enough to be able to sit there and listen to what we're doing. Thank you. That's an arrogant point of view that I don't think exists anymore. I don't think it has place anymore in the times that we live in.
I think it definitely still exists. There's always been an elitism of classical music. And I just wanted to say that one of my treasured experiences of performing with Greater Bridgeport Symphony is we go into the schools, the Bridgeport schools. Eric and I have gone just alone and played for little ones, high school ones, and the problems you speak of, Lucy, are huge and far more than we can address and solve in this conversation. But the lack of opportunity for the disadvantaged kids is huge. But we go in and play this music for them, this elite music that they don't have the education to grasp. They respond so well. I mean, these kids who are, teeny weeny little ones, they love it. The high school kids, they love it because they've never seen it. They don't even know what a symphony orchestra is. And there's one playing live music for them, and they eat it up. So it's the finding ways to bring these opportunities across the globe, across the income levels, across neighborhoods. That's what everybody loves music. Everybody loves. There's nobody who doesn't play some kind of music, who lives in complete silence. And it's just a question of language and being able to communicate with one another and finding ways to do that.
Yeah. Well, that actually answered one of my final questions, which was like, what's your elevator pitch for, if I've had the Kool-Aid, I've had quite a bit of the Kool-Aid, so I'm there. But if someone doesn't believe in or is maybe turned off to the idea of classical music just because they hear the word classical, the elevator pitch for that. And Debbie, I think you articulated it so beautifully. As our time winds down, I want to know from each of you what you're listening to that you would recommend. And it can be something on this program, of course, but I would also love to hear, if folks are out there and they're listening to this and they think, I would really love to hear a piece of either new music or.
Well, I just selfishly, I'm listening to the recording projects I did recently. One which is with the Greater Bridgeport Symphony. I think the album releases today or tomorrow, very soon.
Tonight, yeah.
Tonight. So it's this album with Kahan Kalhor, and it's called Blue as the Turquoise Night. And it was a highlight of my career with Bridgeport to work with these musicians and play this music. It was great. The other album I also did with Eric Jacobson, the Knights just released a Christmas album called The Nights Before Christmas. And that's also very wonderful. So sort of immersed in my own particular little projects at the moment, but listening to Prokofiev Violin Concerto.
Eduardo, what about you?
What I'm listening to, like it goes from a wide range of things. Of course, the things that you listen to for work. So now we're working on next season. So so a few of the composers that I mentioned before is the people that I'm listening to actively, choosing like which pieces of them to do. Including Jeffrey Mumphrey and George Lewis. I'm also things that I like to listen at home. Like sometimes it's from Radiohead to Ghanaian percussion music that I still have to like try to figure out how they play those rhythms. And of course, I listen to a lot of Brazilian music, like from my end, and the other things for work. I'm, currently like in different projects conducting Tchaikovsky Fourth Symphony and Richard Strauss, the Eulenspiegel, Lucia Streicher, and Glazunov Violin Concerto, and a bunch of new pieces. The recordings for New York New Music Ensemble, the CD that just came out, we just less than a month ago released the CD. We were working on those, and we had a live performance of those finally. That was like really fun thing to do. So there's a very often in my ears as well, because like when you do a recording, especially when you edit, mix, master, do everything, those things like stay imprinted in your brain for a really long time. And before that, we are just looking for new music. So part of the job of curating concerts is to go and look for other things. So I have a lengthy list of composers that either have been recommended to me, or I listen to a snippet of the music and I was interested, and I write those down so that I can go and research them. So as long as, for me, music remains like a living organism that's always changing, mutating, and finding new paths, that's good. That works for me.
Oh, I hope I didn't freeze. Did I? Okay, great.
Just for a second, yeah.
Oh no, it's just one of those days. So I wanted to thank both of you, Eduardo Leandro and Deborah Long, so much for joining me today. They will both be on stage at the Klein Memorial Auditorium tomorrow night at 8 p.m. performing. Harry Droz, who is the man behind the ticket link in the Facebook and the YouTube and all those online things. So if you hear this and you are moved, or if you have tickets already, join them tomorrow night. I want to thank both of you so much, and I hope you stay dry.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful.
It was really pleasurable. Thanks.